Have you ever noticed that your mind almost never goes quiet? Even in moments when nothing is happening, thoughts keep appearing. One memory triggers another. One worry leads to 10 more. Sometimes the mind talks so much that it feels impossible to escape it. Most people assume this is normal. They believe the voice in their head is who they are. The thoughts feel personal.
They feel intimate. They feel like me. But pause for a moment and look more closely. Did you choose the next thought you were about to have? Or did it simply arrive? This question may seem small, but it changes everything. If thoughts appear on their own, without your permission, then what exactly are they? And more importantly,
who is the one noticing them? When a thought says, "I am anxious," something in you recognizes that anxiety. When another thought says, "I shouldn't feel this way," something in you hears that judgment. There is already a separation taking place, even if you have never named it before. Most of our suffering begins because we never notice this separation. We assume that whatever the mind says must be true. We identify with every story, every fear, every criticism, and every regret as if it defines us. Over time, this creates exhaustion. The mind feels like a prison you cannot leave, because you believe you are the prisoner and the guard at the same time.
Western culture encourages this confusion. From a young age, we are taught to think better, think faster, think more positively. Rarely are we invited to question the thinker itself. We are told to improve the content of the mind, but not to look at the structure of experience. As a result, the mental noise increases, and so does the pressure to control it. But here is the quiet observation most people miss. Even when the mind is loud, something in you is still aware. That awareness is calm by nature. It does not argue. It does not panic. It simply notices. Thoughts move through it like weather passing through the sky. Clouds may gather, storms may form, but the sky itself is never harmed by what appears within it. This is not a spiritual belief. It is something you can verify directly, right now. As you listen to these words, thoughts may arise in response. Agreement, doubt, curiosity, or resistance. Notice that they are being seen. And notice that the seeing itself does not speak. This simple noticing is where everything begins. And this is the question we will stay with, here on Miraculous Buddhism. Not as philosophy, not as doctrine, but as lived experience. If you can observe your thoughts, then how could they possibly be who you are? Once you begin to notice that thoughts arise on their own, a deeper question naturally follows. If these thoughts are not fully under your control, why do they have so much power over how you feel? Why can a single sentence in your mind change your entire emotional state? The reason is simple, but often overlooked. We suffer not because thoughts appear, but because we believe they are us. The moment a thought is labeled as my thought, it becomes personal. It carries authority. It stops being information and starts becoming identity. A passing mental event is suddenly treated as a fact about who you are. Consider how this works in everyday life. A thought appears saying, "I'm not good enough." On its own, it is just a string of words. But the instant you identify with it, your body reacts.
The chest tightens, the mood drops down, behavior changes. The thought itself did not cause the suffering. The identification did. This is why trying to fight or replace thoughts rarely brings lasting relief. When you argue with a thought, you are still taking it seriously. When you try to suppress it, you confirm its importance. Even positive affirmations can become another layer of struggle. if they are used to cover over fear rather than understand it. What is rarely taught is that thoughts do not need to be fixed in order for peace to appear. They need to be seen clearly. When a thought is observed rather than believed, it loses its grip.
It becomes lighter, more transparent. It may still arise, but it no longer defines the moment. This shift is subtle, yet profound. You begin to notice that thoughts come and go, while awareness remains. Some thoughts are loud, others quiet. Some repeat for years, others vanish instantly. Yet the capacity to notice them does not age,
does not collapse, and does not argue back. It is simply present. Many people fear that without identifying with thought, they will become passive or disconnected. In reality, the opposite happens. When you are no longer trapped inside mental commentary, you respond more clearly. Actions become grounded in reality rather than reaction. You listen more fully. You speak with intention rather than compulsion. This is not about rejecting the mind. The mind is a useful tool. It plans, analyzes, and remembers. The problem only begins when the tool is mistaken for the user. When thought claims ownership of awareness, confusion arises. When awareness reclaims its natural position, clarity follows. In this teaching, there is no demand to change what you think. There is only an invitation to notice what you are before the next thought appears. If thoughts are not who you are, then something else must be present. Something that notices them without becoming entangled. This presence is so familiar that it is usually overlooked. It does not announce itself. It does not demand attention. It simply observes. From the moment you wake up to the moment you fall asleep, this silent observer is always there. It watches thoughts form, emotions shift, and sensations move through the body. It notices excitement and boredom, confidence and doubt, pleasure and discomfort. Yet it remains unchanged by what it sees. This is why awareness cannot be found as an object. You cannot point to it the way you point to a thought or a feeling. The moment you try to observe it directly, you realize it is the observing itself. It has no shape, no voice, and no opinion. And because it has no opinion, it does not suffer. Most people live as if this observer does not exist. Their attention is constantly pulled into the content of the mind. They chase one thought, then another, hoping the next one will finally bring relief or certainty. But certainty never arrives, because thoughts are unstable by nature. They were never meant to be a place of rest. The silent observer, on the other hand, does not need stability. It is already stable. It does not depend on what is happening, whether the mind is calm or chaotic. Awareness remains open. Whether life feels meaningful or confusing, awareness does not collapse. This is the turning point many people miss. Peace doesn't come from arranging thoughts into the right order. It comes from recognizing the space in which all thoughts appear. When attention shifts from the noise to the noticing, the relationship with the mind changes naturally. You stop trying to control what arises and start understanding where it arises. This understanding does not remove thoughts. It removes the illusion that they are in charge. Thoughts continue to appear, but they are no longer taken as commands. They become signals, suggestions, or passing impressions rather than unquestionable truths. This is also why silence can feel uncomfortable at first. When attention rests in awareness instead of thought, the familiar sense of identity begins to loosen. The mind may rush in with distractions, questions, or doubts. This is not a failure. It is a sign that the old habit of identification is being challenged. In this moment, nothing needs to be done. Simply noticing that there is awareness is enough. You do not have to hold on to it. You cannot lose it. You are already what is noticing. This simple recognition sets the foundation for everything that follows. When people first hear this idea, they often assume it is a modern psychological insight. In reality, it was articulated more than 2,000 years ago by Gautama Buddha. What made his teaching radical was not that it offered comfort, but that it challenged the most basic assumption human beings make about themselves. The Buddha did not ask people to believe in a new philosophy. He asked them to look directly at experience. When he spoke about suffering, he did not blame life, emotions, or the mind. He pointed to identification. The moment we mistake mental activity for a fixed self, tension arises. The mind becomes something we defend, justify, and protect. In the Buddha's observation, thoughts are events, feelings are events, sensations are events. They arise due to conditions and disappear when those conditions change. None of them stay long enough to be a stable identity. Yet awareness remains present throughout every change. This is not something mystical. It is something immediately verifiable. This is why the Buddha avoided giving people a solid definition of the self. Any definition would become another concept to cling to. Instead, he pointed away from what we are not. Not this thought, not this emotion, not this passing state. What remains when these are seen clearly is not a thing, but a way of seeing. For many people, this feels unsettling at first. We are accustomed to defining ourselves by our stories, our struggles, and our mental narratives. Letting go of identification can feel like losing ground. But the Buddha observed that what feels like loss is actually release. The weight we carry is not life itself, but the constant effort to maintain a mental image of who we think we are. When identification loosens, something unexpected happens. Life does not become empty, it becomes more intimate. You feel emotions more clearly without being consumed by them. You think when thinking is needed, without being trapped in endless commentary. Action arises naturally, guided by clarity rather than fear. This teaching was never meant to turn people into passive observers. It was meant to free attention so it could meet life directly. When awareness is no longer hijacked by thought, compassion becomes easier, listening becomes deeper, presence becomes natural rather than forced. The Buddha's most shocking insight was not that there is no self in the way we imagine it. It was that freedom is available the moment we stop mistaking mental movement for identity. Nothing has to be added. Nothing has to be achieved. Only something needs to be seen. So, this understanding completes the foundation of Chapter 1. From here, we will explore why this realization feels threatening to the mind, and how resistance itself becomes the final barrier to peace. At first glance, the idea that you are not your thoughts sounds liberating. Yet for many people, it quickly becomes uncomfortable. Something inside resists it. Doubts appear. The mind pushes back, demanding certainty, explanation, and control. This resistance is not accidental. It serves a very specific function. The mind is designed to create continuity. It strings together memories, labels experiences, and builds a narrative that feels stable. That narrative becomes what we call me. When you hear that thoughts are not who you are, the mind interprets it as a threat. If thoughts are not me, then what holds everything together? What guarantees safety? What ensures control? This is where fear quietly enters. Not fear of danger, but fear of groundlessness. 10. The ego depends on thought to maintain its sense of existence. It survives by naming, judging, and predicting. When identification loosens, even slightly, the ego senses that its authority is being questioned. Resistance is its natural response. This resistance often disguises itself as intelligence. The mind asks philosophical questions, demands logical proof, or dismisses the insight as impractical.
It may say, "This sounds nice, but it doesn't apply to real life." Or if I stop identifying with thoughts, I won't function properly. These objections feel reasonable, yet they arise from the same assumption being challenged. Notice something important here. Resistance itself is made of thoughts.
Doubt is a thought. Skepticism is a thought. Even the fear of losing control is a thought. And just like every other thought, these reactions are being observed. Awareness does not disappear when resistance appears. It notices resistance the same way it notices anything else. This is a crucial turning point. The teaching does not ask you to eliminate resistance. It asks you to see it clearly. The moment resistance is observed rather than believed, it loses its authority. It becomes another movement in the mind, not a command you must obey. Many people expect clarity to feel calm and pleasant from the beginning. In reality, clarity often feels destabilizing at first. Old structures loosen, familiar reference points fade. The mind reacts by trying to reassert itself. This does not mean something has gone wrong. It means something fundamental is being seen. When this is understood, the struggle softens. You stop trying to force acceptance. You allow resistance to rise and fall like everything else. In doing so, you discover that awareness does not need agreement to remain present. It does not need certainty to be stable. It simply is. This insight prepares us for the next step, where we will explore how this resistance shapes anxiety, overthinking, and the constant need to mentally protect a self that was never as solid as it seemed. Once resistance appears, it often expresses itself as anxiety. This is not a coincidence. Anxiety is what happens when thought tries to protect an identity it believes is fragile.
The ego senses uncertainty and responds by increasing mental activity, hoping that more thinking will restore a sense of control. Notice how anxiety behaves. It rarely stays focused on the present moment. It projects into the future, replaying scenarios that have not happened yet. It revisits the past, searching for mistakes,
warning signs, and or evidence that something went wrong. The mind moves constantly because stillness feels unsafe when identity is built on thought. At the center of anxiety is a simple assumption. Something bad will happen to me. This sentence appears as a thought, but it is treated as a fact. The body reacts as if danger is real and immediate. Muscles tighten. Breathing becomes shallow. Attention narrows, yet the danger exists only as a mental image. This is where identification does the most damage. When a fearful thought arises and is believed, it becomes personal. I am anxious quickly turns into I am unsafe. The ego interprets the thought as a signal about reality, rather than recognizing it as a mental projection. The loop feeds itself. More thoughts appear to solve the fear created by previous thoughts. Overthinking follows the same pattern. The mind believes that if it analyzes enough, it can eliminate uncertainty. But uncertainty is not a problem to be solved. It is a condition of being alive. The attempt to think your way out of uncertainty only strengthens the habit of identification, making the mind louder and more demanding. Here is the subtle shift that changes everything. Anxiety does not disappear when thoughts stop. It softens when identification loosens. When a fearful thought is seen as an event rather than a warning, the body no longer needs to react as strongly. The nervous system begins to settle, not because the future is guaranteed, but because awareness is no longer trapped inside imagination. This does not mean fear will never arise again.
It means fear will arise as a sensation and a thought, not as an identity. You may notice anxiety without becoming anxious. You may feel concern without being consumed by it. This distinction is small in language, but enormous in lived experience. The ego fears this shift because it believes it will lose relevance. In reality, it simply loses dominance. Thought remains available when needed, but it no longer runs the system. Awareness becomes the reference point, not mental commentary. Understanding this prepares us to move beyond theory. In the next section, we will explore how to directly experience this shift in awareness, not as an idea, but as something immediately accessible in your own experience. Once you understand how anxiety and overthinking are fueled by identification, a new possibility appears. You no longer need to escape the mind. You only need to see how it operates. This shift from fighting to observing is subtle, but it changes the entire dynamic. Begin by noticing the loop itself. A thought arises. The thought carries a sense of urgency or threat. The body reacts. Another thought appears in response, trying to fix or explain the discomfort. This creates tension, which triggers more thinking. The cycle continues, not because it is effective, but because it is familiar. Most people are trapped in this loop without realizing it. They experience the thoughts and emotions, but not the structure that connects them. Awareness is pulled into the content, so the pattern remains invisible. When the pattern is unseen, it feels personal and unavoidable. The moment you notice the loop as a process rather than a problem, space opens up. You begin to see that the loop does not require your participation to exist. It runs on habit. It feeds on attention. When attention relaxes, the loop loses momentum. This does not mean thoughts stop immediately. They may continue for a while, just as a spinning wheel continues after you stop pushing it. But something important has changed. You are no longer inside the wheel. You are watching it spin. This is where many people misunderstand the practice. They try to watch thoughts in order to get rid of them. That effort itself becomes another form of control, another layer of identification. The invitation here is simpler. Watch without agenda. Let thoughts arise and pass without assigning meaning or urgency. As this watching becomes more natural, you may notice brief moments of stillness between thoughts. These moments are not created. They were always there. They were simply overlooked because attention was habitually engaged with mental activity. In these gaps, awareness recognizes itself without effort. The mind may react to this stillness with discomfort or restlessness. It may rush in with new thoughts and questions or distractions. This is normal. The mind is accustomed to movement. Stillness feels unfamiliar, not because it is dangerous, but because it does not support the old sense of identity. Nothing needs to be corrected here. The appearance of new thoughts does not mean the stillness was lost. It means the mind noticed it. Awareness remains present through both silence and noise. Once this is seen, confidence grows naturally, not as belief, but as recognition. This is the beginning of freedom from the mental loop. Not freedom from thoughts, but freedom from being trapped by them. From here,
We can explore how this recognition deepens into a stable way of relating to experience, even in the midst of daily life. As this way of seeing begins to settle in, many people notice something unexpected. Instead of constant relief, there may be moments of discomfort, restlessness, or unease. This often leads to confusion. If awareness brings freedom, why does it sometimes feel unsettling? The answer is simple. Discomfort is not a sign that something is wrong. It is a sign that an old habit is loosening. For most of your life, identity has been built on thought. The mind has been the reference point for meaning, safety, and direction. When awareness becomes primary, that familiar structure begins to dissolve. The mind interprets this as loss. It may respond with subtle panic, doubt, or a renewed effort to reassert control. Thoughts may intensify. Emotions may feel sharper for a while. This does not mean awareness has failed. It means identification is being challenged. Imagine standing up after sitting in the dark for a long time. At first, the light feels harsh. The eyes resist. But the discomfort does not come from the light itself. It comes from the adjustment. In the same way, awareness exposes how much effort has been spent maintaining a mental identity. When that effort relaxes, the contrast is felt. Many people make the mistake of retreating at this stage. They assume peace should feel pleasant at all times. When discomfort appears, they return to old habits of distraction, analysis, or self-improvement, but doing so only reinforces the belief that something needs to be fixed. The Buddha's insight was far more subtle. He recognized that freedom does not depend on comfort. It depends on clarity. When awareness remains present, even in discomfort, the discomfort loses its authority. It becomes another experience, not a problem demanding resolution. This is where trust develops naturally. Not trust in a belief system, but trust in direct experience. You begin to see that awareness does not collapse when things feel uncertain. It does not disappear when emotions intensify. It remains steady through every change. Over time, this steadiness becomes familiar. The mind learns that it does not need to fight or flee. Thoughts continue to arise, but they are no longer taken as signals of danger. Emotions move through the body without defining the moment. Life feels less controlled, but more alive. This completes our exploration of why the mind resists this teaching. In the next chapter, we will move beyond understanding and into direct experience, exploring how this recognition can be accessed effortlessly, in ordinary moments or without withdrawing from daily life. Up to this point, everything we've explored can still remain at the level of understanding. The mind can agree, disagree, or quietly turn these ideas into another belief system. But the teaching itself does not live in belief. It lives in direct experience. That is why the next step is not to think more clearly, but to look more honestly. You do not need to change your posture, close your eyes, or enter a special state. This is not a technique. It is a shift in attention that can happen right where you are. As you listen, thoughts may arise about what is being said. Notice that those thoughts are already objects of awareness. You do not need to push them away. Simply recognize that they are being seen. Now, gently bring attention to the fact that you are aware. Not aware of something specific, but aware itself. This may feel subtle at first. The mind may try to turn it into a concept, asking, "Am I doing this right?" That question is also a thought, and it too is being noticed. Nothing needs to be corrected. Here is the key observation. Awareness is already present before any effort is made. You do not create it by focusing. You discover it by relaxing the habit of chasing thought. The moment attention stops leaning forward into mental activity, awareness reveals itself naturally. You may notice sounds in the room, sensations in the body, or the rhythm of your breath. Let them be exactly as they are. Notice that awareness does not need to choose one over another. Everything appears within the same open field.
Thoughts are included, but they no longer dominate. This is where many people become confused. They expect awareness to feel dramatic or extraordinary. Instead, it feels ordinary, quiet, neutral. It does not announce itself with emotion. It does not try to convince you of anything. It simply remains present.
If attention drifts back into thinking, that is not a mistake. The noticing of distraction is itself awareness. There is no need to return to a point of focus. Just recognize what is happening. Each recognition gently weakens the habit of identification without force. For brief moments, you may sense a subtle spaciousness. Thoughts continue, but they feel less dense. Emotions may arise, but they do not overwhelm. This is not something to hold on to. Trying to hold it turns it into another object. Let it come and go like everything else. What matters is not the duration of this recognition, but the clarity of it. Even a single moment of seeing is enough to reveal the truth of what the Buddha pointed to. Awareness does not belong to thought. Thought appears within awareness. From here, the practice is no longer about effort. It becomes about remembering to notice. In the next section, we will explore how this recognition can be integrated into ordinary activities, so it is not limited to quiet moments, but available throughout daily life. One of the most common misunderstandings is that awareness belongs only to quiet moments. People assume it requires silence, isolation, or a special posture. In reality, awareness is most transformative when it is discovered in the middle of ordinary life. Exactly where habits of identification usually take over. Notice how daily activities unfold. You are walking, eating, working, or speaking with someone, and thoughts comment constantly on what is happening. They judge, compare, anticipate, and rehearse. Normally, attention is pulled entirely into this commentary. Life is experienced through the filter of thought rather than directly. The shift begins when you recognize that awareness does not need the mind to stop in order to be present. While thoughts continue, you can notice the simple fact of being aware of movement, sound, or sensation. This noticing does not interrupt activity. It runs quietly alongside it. For example, while walking, feel the contact of your feet with the ground. Thoughts may describe where you are going or what you should do next. Let them be there. At the same time, notice that awareness includes both the thoughts and the physical sensations without effort. Nothing needs to be prioritized. In conversations, awareness can notice the impulse to react before words are spoken. You may feel a tightening in the body or a surge of emotion. Instead of immediately following the mental response, awareness creates a brief pause. In that pause, choice becomes possible. Listening deepens. Speech becomes more intentional. This does not make life slower or less engaged. It makes it more precise. When attention is not consumed by inner commentary, you respond to what is actually happening rather than to what the mind predicts or fears. Actions arise from clarity instead of habit. At first, this integration feels inconsistent. Awareness may be present for a few moments and then forgotten. This is normal. The habit of identification
has been reinforced for years. Forgetting does not mean failure.
Each time awareness returns, even briefly, the pattern weakens. Over time, you may notice that certain situations trigger stronger identification. Stress, conflict, or uncertainty often pull attention back into thought. These moments are not obstacles, they are opportunities. The stronger the pull, the clearer the contrast between awareness and identification can become.
The key is gentleness. Awareness cannot be forced into daily life. It reveals itself when effort relaxes. Trying to remember awareness too aggressively only strengthens the sense of a doer who must control experience. Instead, allow awareness to reappear naturally, again and again. As this becomes familiar, a quiet confidence develops. Not confidence in outcomes but confidence in presence. You realize that regardless of what thoughts arise, awareness remains available. Life continues to move, but you are no longer lost inside the commentary about it.
This integration prepares us for the next step, where we will explore how awareness transforms emotional experience without suppressing or bypassing it. As awareness becomes more present in daily life, emotions begin to change in an unexpected way. They do not disappear, but they lose their power to define who you are. This shift is subtle, yet it touches the deepest layers of suffering. Most people experience emotions through identification. When sadness arises, it becomes I am sad. When anger appears, it becomes I am angry. The emotion is no longer an experience moving through awareness. It becomes an identity, a story about the self. This is why emotions can feel overwhelming. They are carrying the weight of who you think you are. When awareness is present, this dynamic changes. An emotion arises, and it is felt directly in the body. There may be heaviness, heat, tightness, or movement. Thoughts may comment on it, explaining why it is there or what it means. Instead of following those explanations, awareness simply notices the sensation and the commentary together. This does not suppress emotion. In fact, it allows emotion to be felt more fully. Without resistance or judgment, emotions are free to move. They intensify, peak, and fade naturally. What once felt unbearable often becomes manageable, not because it is weaker, but because it is no longer personalized. Many people fear that allowing emotions in this way will lead to being overwhelmed. The opposite is true. What overwhelms us is not emotion itself, but the story attached to it. Awareness separates the raw experience from the narrative, creating space where the body can process what is happening without mental escalation. This is especially important with difficult emotions like grief, fear, or anger. These emotions are part of being human. Awareness does not try to eliminate them. It provides a container in which they can be experienced safely. When emotion is allowed without identification, it completes its cycle more efficiently. Over time, a new relationship with emotion develops. You begin to trust that feelings can arise without consuming you. You learn that you do not need to protect yourself from your inner experience. Awareness remains a steady, even when emotions are intense. This steadiness is not numbness. It is intimacy without entanglement. You feel more, not less, but you are no longer defined by what you feel in any given moment. Emotions become messages rather than verdicts. They inform, but they do not imprison. This is one of the most practical expressions of the Buddha's insight. Freedom does not come from controlling the mind or avoiding emotion. It comes from seeing clearly what you are not, so that experience can unfold without distortion. With this understanding, we are ready to move into the next chapter, where we explore how this way of seeing transforms suffering at its root, not by changing life, but by changing the relationship to experience itself. Many people approach this teaching with a quiet expectation. They believe that if awareness deepens, the mind should finally become silent. When thoughts continue to arise,
They assume something is wrong. This misunderstanding keeps overthinking alive. The end of overthinking does not mean the end of thought. It means the end of compulsive identification with thought. The mind continues to function, but it is no longer treated as the center of who you are. Thinking becomes a tool instead of a place you live inside.
Overthinking is not caused by too many thoughts. It is caused by taking thoughts personally. The mind repeats itself because it believes something important is at stake. It is trying to protect, predict, or control. When awareness recognizes that no identity is actually under threat, the urgency dissolves on its own. Notice how overthinking feels in the body. There is often tension in the head, chest, or stomach. A sense of pressure builds, as if something must be resolved immediately. This pressure does not come from the situation itself. It comes from the belief that thought is responsible for your safety or worth.
When awareness is present, this belief loosens. Thoughts may still present problems or possibilities, but they no longer carry emotional weight by default. You can think about a situation without becoming trapped in it. The body responds differently because the signal of danger is no longer constant.
This is why trying to stop thinking rarely works. It treats thought as the enemy, which reinforces its importance. Awareness takes a different approach. It allows thought to arise and pass without assigning authority. In this space, thinking becomes lighter and more efficient because it is no longer driven by fear. You may notice moments where the mind simply rests after being seen. Thoughts slow down, not because you force them to, but because they are no longer needed to maintain identity. These moments may come and go. They are not the goal. They are a byproduct of clarity.
The real shift happens when you realize that peace is not something thought produces. Peace is what remains when thought is no longer mistaken for self. In that recognition, overthinking loses its fuel. The mind still speaks, but it no longer shouts. This understanding marks a turning point. From here on, suffering is no longer something to be fixed.
It becomes something to be understood. In the next section, we will look more closely at how suffering dissolves when identification ends. Even while life continues to present challenges, one of the most surprising discoveries in this teaching is that suffering does not end because life improves. It ends because the relationship to experience changes. Situations may remain the same. Challenges still arise. Yet the sense of being psychologically trapped begins to dissolve. This is difficult to accept at first, because the mind is conditioned to believe that peace depends on outcomes.
If the problem is solved, if the future becomes secure, if people behave differently, then relief will come. But notice how often relief is temporary. As soon as one issue resolves, another replaces it. The mind moves on, searching again. The Buddha pointed to a different cause. He observed that suffering is created by clinging to outcomes, clinging to identities, clinging to mental stories about how things should be. When awareness sees this clearly, clinging loosens. And when clinging loosens, suffering loses its foundation. This does not mean pain disappears. Pain is part of life. Bodies feel discomfort. Emotions respond to loss. But suffering is pain, plus resistance,
It is the added layer of mental struggle that says, "This should not be happening to me," or "I cannot handle this." When identification ends, that layer weakens. You may notice this in simple moments. A difficulty arises. There is an initial reaction, but instead of spiraling into analysis or self-judgment, awareness remains present. The experience unfolds without being turned into a personal failure or threat. The moment passes more cleanly. This is why awareness is not passive. It is deeply responsive. When clarity replaces identification, action becomes more appropriate. You address what needs to be Addressed without carrying the emotional residue of imagined futures or remembered pasts. Energy is conserved. Attention stays with what is real. Over time, this changes how life feels. There is more space around experience. Problems are handled one at a time, instead of being layered with mental commentary. Even difficult circumstances feel lighter, not because they are pleasant, but because they are no longer interpreted as proof of inadequacy or danger. This shift does not require constant vigilance. Awareness is already present. Each time identification relaxes, even briefly, the nervous system learns a new pattern. Life no longer feels like something you must mentally survive. It becomes something you participate in directly. This is what the end of suffering actually means in this teaching. Not the absence of challenge, but the absence of unnecessary struggle. In the next section, we will explore how this freedom stabilizes over time, becoming a quiet background to daily life rather than a temporary insight. At this stage, a subtle shift begins to take place. Awareness is no longer experienced as something you access occasionally. It starts to feel like a quiet background that is always present. Thoughts and emotions still move through the foreground, but they no longer define the whole picture. Many people assume stability means maintaining a certain mental state. They try to stay calm, focused, or detached, but this effort creates tension. True stability does not come from holding a state in place. It comes from recognizing what does not change, regardless of the state. Awareness remains present whether the mind is busy or quiet. It is there during clarity and confusion, ease and discomfort. When this is seen clearly, the need to manage experience relaxes. You stop measuring progress by how you feel and start noticing what is always available beneath those feelings. This is why setbacks no longer feel like failure. A stressful day, an emotional reaction, or a period of distraction does not erase awareness. It simply reveals how quickly attention can become identified again. The moment this is noticed, stability is already present. Nothing has been lost. Over time, this recognition builds trust. Not trust in yourself as a personality, but trust in awareness as a reliable ground. You realize that no experience has the power to overwhelm what is observing it. Even intense thoughts and emotions appear within something larger and more stable than themselves. This trust changes how you relate to effort. You no longer feel the need to constantly monitor your inner state. Awareness takes care of itself. When attention drifts, it returns naturally. When identification appears, it is seen sooner. Life begins to feel less fragile. Importantly, this stability does not isolate you from the world. It makes engagement more fluid. You respond to situations without carrying unnecessary tension. You feel emotions fully without being pulled into their stories. Action becomes simpler because it is not burdened by self-protection. This is the quiet maturity of the teaching. Nothing dramatic is added. Nothing needs to be maintained. Awareness becomes the context rather than the content of experience. From this place, suffering no longer defines your relationship with life. With this understanding, we are ready to move toward the final phase of the teaching. In the next chapter, we will explore why this freedom can feel unfamiliar or even empty at first, and how that emptiness is often misunderstood as something missing
rather than something opening. As identification loosens and awareness becomes more stable, a new and often confusing experience may appear. Life can feel quieter, more spacious, and less driven by inner commentary. For some, this is deeply relieving. For others, it feels unsettling, even empty. This reaction is common,
and it is important to understand it clearly, or the mind is accustomed to constant activity. For years, identity has been shaped by thought, emotion, and personal narrative. When these movements lose their central role, the familiar sense of me begins to soften. The mind interprets this softening as a loss because it no longer feels the same intensity or urgency it once did. This is where emptiness is misunderstood. Emptiness does not mean nothingness. It means the absence of unnecessary structure. The mental noise that once filled every moment quiets down, and in its place there is space. The mind, unfamiliar with space, labels it as dull,
meaningless, or lacking. But notice what is actually present in this space. Awareness is still here. Sensations are still here. Life continues to move. What is missing is the constant commentary that used to define experience. The mind confuses the absence of noise with the absence of meaning. This misunderstanding often triggers a subtle attempt to recreate the old sense of self. Thoughts may return with renewed force. Distractions may become more appealing. The mind searches for stimulation, drama, or problems to solve. This is not a regression. It is the ego trying to re-establish familiar ground. If emptiness is allowed without interpretation, it reveals its true nature. It is not a void, but openness. In this openness, an experience feels lighter. You are less compelled to react. You do not need constant validation from thought. There is room to breathe, to listen, and to respond naturally. This stage requires patience. The mind may insist that something important has been lost, but nothing essential is missing. What is fading is the habit of defining yourself through mental activity. When this habit relaxes, life does not lose richness. It gains depth. Over time, emptiness begins to feel peaceful rather than threatening. You realize that you are not disconnected from life.
You are simply no longer entangled in constant self-reference. Actions still happen. Emotions still arise. But they are no longer weighed down by the need to confirm who you are. This is a crucial transition. In the next section, we will explore how this openness naturally gives rise to clarity and compassion, not as moral ideals, but as spontaneous expressions of awareness itself. The word emptiness carries a heavy misunderstanding. In everyday language, it suggests absence, lack, or meaninglessness. But what is being pointed to here is something very different. Emptiness does not refer to what is missing. It refers to what is no longer fixed. When identity is built on thought, everything feels solid. Opinions feel permanent. Emotions feel defining. Problems feel personal and urgent. This solidity creates tension, because life itself is fluid. When awareness reveals that thoughts and identities are not fixed, the sense of solidity dissolves. The mind experiences this dissolution as emptiness. What is actually happening is openness. Experience is no longer confined to rigid interpretations. Thoughts can arise without needing to be defended. Emotions can move without being resisted. Situations can change without threatening a sense of self. The structure that once held everything in place relaxes. This openness allows intelligence to function more freely. When the mind is not busy protecting an identity, it sees more clearly. Responses become more appropriate because they are not filtered through fear or self-image. Compassion arises naturally, not because it is practiced, but because separation has softened. Many people assume compassion must be cultivated through effort. In this teaching, compassion is a byproduct of clarity. When you no longer experience yourself as a separate entity constantly under threat, the suffering of others is no longer distant or abstract. It is felt directly, without being overwhelming. This is why emptiness is not cold or detached. It is intimate, without the barrier of constant self-reference. Experience feels closer. Sounds are more vivid. Conversations feel more present. Even silence carries a sense of fullness, not because something is happening, but because nothing is being blocked. The mind may still attempt to label this openness as boring or uneventful. It is used to stimulation and contrast, but as sensitivity deepens, subtlety becomes rich. What once seemed empty begins to feel spacious and alive. This shift cannot be rushed. The habit of defining life through mental activity has been reinforced over many years. Allowing openness to be familiar takes time, but each moment of non-resistance strengthens trust in what is already here. Eventually, the question changes. Instead of asking, "What am I missing?" you begin to ask, "What was I carrying that I no longer need?" In that question, the weight of unnecessary effort falls away. This understanding completes our exploration of emptiness. In the next and final chapter, we will bring everything together, not as a conclusion to memorize, but as a way of living with greater ease, clarity, and depth. At this point, something fundamental has shifted. Thought has not disappeared, but it no longer sits at the center of your life. It still plans, remembers, and evaluates, yet it no longer dictates your sense of self. Life begins to feel less reactive and more responsive, not because you are controlling the mind, but because you are no longer confined within it. Living without being run by thought does not mean becoming passive or indifferent. It means action is no longer driven by mental noise. Decisions arise from clarity rather than compulsion. You act when action is needed, and rest when rest is appropriate. The constant background pressure to figure everything out begins to fade. This change is most noticeable in ordinary moments. A problem appears, and the mind offers solutions, but there is no panic. A disagreement arises, and thoughts respond, but there is space to listen. Even uncertainty feels different. It is no longer interpreted as a personal failure, but as a natural condition of life. When thought loses its authority, presence deepens. You notice details that were previously overlooked. A simple conversation feels fuller. A quiet moment feels complete. Life does not need to be constantly interpreted to feel meaningful. Meaning is no longer manufactured by thought. It is sensed directly through engagement. Importantly, this way of living does not require constant awareness. There will still be moments of identification. The mind will still pull attention into old patterns from time to time. The difference now is recognition. Identification is seen sooner, and when it is seen, it loosens naturally. There is no need for self-correction or judgment. This creates a gentle rhythm. Awareness comes forward. Identification recedes. Thought resumes its proper role as a tool. rather than a master. Over time, this rhythm becomes familiar. Life feels less like something to manage and more like something to participate in. What remains is not a new identity, but a new relationship with experience. You are no longer defined by what appears in the mind. You are the space in which life unfolds. Thoughts,
Emotions and situations move through that space, but they do not confine it. This is the practical freedom the Buddha pointed to. Not escape from life, but intimacy with it. Not control of the mind, but understanding of its nature. When this is seen clearly, the struggle to become someone finally ends, and what remains is simply being here.
as you are. In the final section, we will bring this insight to rest, not as an ending, but as an open invitation to continue living from clarity rather than habit. There is nothing more you need to understand, nothing to remember, nothing to add to yourself. What matters most has already been seen. Thoughts arise and pass. Emotions move and change. And through it all, awareness remains quietly present. This is not an achievement. It is not a state you must hold on to. It is simply the recognition of what has always been here, before every thought, before every story about who you are supposed to be. When this recognition settles,
life no longer feels like a problem to solve. It feels like something unfolding, moment by moment. You may notice that thoughts still try to pull attention back into old patterns. That is natural. Habits do not disappear overnight. But now there is space. You can notice the pull without following it. You can hear the voice of the mind without believing it.
in that space, choice quietly returns. Nothing dramatic needs to happen next. Awareness does not demand change. It does not push you toward a better version of yourself. It simply allows you to meet life as it is, without the constant pressure to define, defend, or explain yourself. This is why the Buddha's teaching was never meant to be shocking in a sensational way. It was shocking because it revealed that freedom was never hidden. It was overlooked, not because it was complex, but because it was too close to notice while chasing thought.
As you return to your day, let this understanding remain light. Do not turn it into a belief. Do not measure yourself against it. Simply notice, from time to time, that you are aware, that noticing is enough. And this is the space we return to, here on Miraculous Buddhism, not to give answers and not to build identities,
but to offer a quiet place where clarity can emerge on its own. If this way of seeing resonates with you, you are welcome to stay, not as a follower, but as someone willing to look honestly at experience again and again. Because the most important question is not one you answer with words. It is the one you live with gently if you are not your thoughts. Then who are you? Right now, before the next one appears.